All right, if y'all don't mind, I'm going to pray and we'll get started on lesson 2. God, we thank you for this morning. Boy, was it brisk this morning when I stepped out. But we appreciate our seasons. We appreciate just everything that you give us, where we get to live and everything else, and the blessings that you pour out on us. And as we start talking about the friends of Job, let us also remember that we're not sure how we would react in these situations. We're going to discuss that. And may you give me your words instead of mine, because mine get a little jumbled. And we just ask these things in your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. All right. So, yes, you're still putting up with me. You've only got 2 more weeks after this, but I appreciate those of you that decided to come back. We are going to cover Job's so-called friends. So, quick reminder of last week's agenda is we did a general overview, and if, in all intents and purposes, Satan shows up and says, "Hey, I'd like to wreck your guy's life," and God's like, "Okay, you can mess with his stuff, but don't touch his body." So, and one day, y'all remember, 4 people show up right on the heels of the next one, and just lay his life to waste. He doesn't have anything. Satan goes, but he doesn't curse God. He continues. In fact, he tears his clothes, shaves his head, and he still worships. And we talked about that a little bit. So then Satan wanders back into the throne room and says, "Hey, God, I think that the reason he didn't do it is because he's still healthy. And who wouldn't give up everything for their health?" And so God says, "Wreck him. Go to town." And so he basically gets sick and just, horribly. And we're going to hear from him and what he thinks of that next week. I've invited him. He may actually show up in person. I haven't confirmed that yet, but we're working on that. But he went through all that, and yet still, even with his wife saying, "Just curse God and die," he doesn't do it. So now we come to who comes to his rescue, or who comes to his comfort, who shows up for him. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is Job's so-called friends. And next week we'll do the 3 few words from Job, and then we'll get into God's turn at the mic. Okay, so for today's topic, what cultural reference were they living in? Does anybody remember from last week? I kind of talked about the time period. What do we think? Yeah, and the next slide I'll actually have a picture. But from a cultural standpoint, we're talking about the ancient times. We're talking about during the time of the patriarchs, when everything it's the family unit. They measured wealth with cattle and land, which Christy and I got into the most interesting conversation about that Wednesday or Thursday over dinner, because we were talking about my notes for this week. And I said, yeah, because he owned, I was talking about land. She goes, well, it doesn't say he owned land. I said, babe, you don't own 3,000 sheep and 9,000 camels or whatever without having some land. And she's like, I can see her trying to come up with but it doesn't say that. I am going to go ahead and say the dude owned land. In fact, I'm going to talk about it next week, that, it was probably something of the King Ranch size, which is the largest ranch, by the way, in Texas, and one of the largest in the nation. All right, so what did they say? Let's talk about it. Was it bad, good, somewhere in the middle? Then we're going to have the young guy step up and talk, and what we can learn from this. And I thought y'all would get a kick out of this. Bad advice everywhere. Okay, did people in Job's time assume suffering meant sin? So yes, the belief was widespread in the ancient world, including the cultural setting of Job, that if you sinned, there must be something wrong with you. Anybody think we still do some of that today? Isn't that interesting that we still will associate bad acts with bad outcomes? And yet, the culture we live in, I would argue, is the exact opposite. And where I come from that, if you keep up with the media in any way, shape, or form, they have made the verse where it says they will count evil as good and good as evil is prevalent outside of the Christian worldview. And even some has crept into the Christian worldview where, we Americanize Jesus. I may have said that up here before, but Nate will definitely, this will resonate, but we so often here in this country, we're so blessed that we assume that's the kind of Jesus we are. And I have to remind people that he was an American, and that he's not a genie in a bottle. He's not any of those kind of things. And yet, our culture leans that way, you know. And don't get me wrong, I think it's great that we say Merry Christmas and all those things. But from a worldview, so I know Christians who tag him as an American Christian, and it's basically he's there to prosper us. And case in point, there's a whole bunch of them. The one, Creflo Dollar, still always sticks in my head. But we've got a church, Uplift, Uprise, something right near us, and it is all about prosperity preaching. I have a guy at my office that has visited there and was like, yeah, I really liked it because they just tell good stories out of the Bible and tell you basically you're okay. They give them warm fuzzies. And that is, I mean, those churches, there's one down in Houston, Joel packs a place with people who want their ego stroked and be told it's okay to be greedy and go after what they want. And I'm not saying things are wrong, but I want to culturally put this in context that we're not really all that different from the guys and gals who were living back then, as much as we'd like to. And we're gonna prove out a few of those things.
Well,
Please.
Jesus' time was the same, right? The disciples asked Jesus, was like, hey, is this man born blind because of his parents?
Perfect. No, you're perfect. Because even when you fast forward, because this was the time period of Job was somewhere 2100 to 1800 BC. 2,000 rough years later, when Jesus walked in the earth, his dudes were still going, hey, this blind guy. And of course, who remembers Jesus' response to that? Right. But so that, there you go. But because so that God could be glorified. And when we get to the end of Job, I would say we get to see that in his life, what has gone down and what he gets back. So the world was governed by a moral cause and effect. The gods rewarded, and that's why I used a small g over there for I'm telling God, is, remember, there were lots of people that worshiped lots of different gods back then. Today we've exchanged that for money, media, power, a few other things. We don't call them out the way we did, but we still have them. We just have, there's new wrappers on them that kind of take the place.
You ever use the phrase karma?
Oh, absolutely I have. Yeah. Hung out in India way too much because boy do they believe in that stuff. Because that's how they, sidebar, but it's your fault. So one of the things that I struggled with the first time, I've been to India 7 times now. And my first time I went for a couple of months, opened some facilities for my company. And I really struggled. Those first couple of weeks, I'm telling you, I wanted to cry when I go back to my room because the roads I drive down, I'm staying in a JW Marriott on the beach. Couldn't get in the ocean because they'd kill you, but that's a different story. Because they dumped raw sewage 2 miles down, and you could maybe see it and possibly smell it if you got close. But I'm in a JW Marriott. My room is the size of this side of this thing. It's opulent. They're delivering fresh fruit to my door every morning in this little thing that sits outside the door with the newspaper, bottled waters, the whole bit. And every day I'm driving, I see children begging. They've got their hands all over the windows if we stop in traffic, and it's killing me. And so I get to talking to some of the guys at the office, and they're like, well, that's okay, because they'll suffer now, because when they're reincarnated, if they've done well, they'll step up. And evidently the top tier, though, is you're a cow. And I haven't figured that one out yet. But they don't eat them, so maybe. And I'm telling you, I've seen them laying in the middle of a 6-lane road, and everyone is diverting around it. They won't make it move. It's amazing. So back to what I want to talk about. Prosperity signaled favor. Suffering signaled offense. How many of us have gotten sick or had a loved one die that unexpectedly, and we struggle with why God allowed that to happen to us? You know, my mom passed 2 years ago, right at it. And I didn't wrestle with that part because she chose not to take care of herself. She had illnesses and she fell. It's very normal. But I've also known friends who have gone through it, that a spouse or a loved one comes down, especially when kids with cancer. That's Mark's favorite. I've told you about Mark. He likes to poke me with that one, going, then why does God let children have cancer? And then I talk about the fall of man and that we're in imperfect bodies and all that. But how many of us, though, struggle with what, I mean, I still do, struggle with why does God allow sometimes his righteous, his children to go through that. And the Bible talks about it. We could go down a whole rabbit hole. But for what we're fixing to talk about with Job's buddies, can you kind of put yourself in where they are as they're fixing to chit-chat with Job? Okay,
I think as humans,
please.
it's very human to just want to have an answer to something. Like,
Absolutely.
It's the easier answer to be like, I did something wrong, and that's why these bad things are happening to me. And if I can figure out what that bad thing is, it's all going to be okay.
You need a formula.
But yeah.
We would like a formula for life.
Yeah, I think
I agree.
that's where a lot of this stems from.
Totally agree.
Is trying to figure it out.
And I think when we accept Christ and we have the Spirit of Christ living in us, if we've got a good relationship, we're reading, we're praying, we've got an open communication channel. I sometimes in my brain, it makes me accept it easier and fight it worse, meaning I still don't get it. I am close to you. I'm doing everything you tell me to. And then I know my Bible, which says I'm going to work all things out for my glory, being God. And I'm like, where are you getting any glory out of me going through this? Now, on the back end, and we'll talk about more of this next week, but when you look back across your lives in those hard spots, really hard spots, Christy and I can, you've heard it's a cliche, but it's true. You can kind of see God's hands all over it when you come out the other side of it. And we'll talk about some of that in the very end when God talks. All right.
And when you're looking for a
Yeah.
formula, it gives you a feeling of control. Because
Absolutely.
you can put input into it.
Yeah. How many of you here prefer chaos? Okay, there's a good answer. All right. So the one thing I want to point out, though, this was culturally not just with God-fearers at the time. This was across Mesopotamian cultures. Egyptian had a wisdom literature. Everybody, even early Israelites through before the later prophetic stuff, everybody at this time, it was all cause and effect. Everything. You didn't suffer unless you had screwed up. Even if you didn't know what it was, there was something that you've done that caused the issues that you're going through. And of course, with what Job's going through, it's significant. So when the friends saw Job's condition, they concluded something has gone wrong in his moral order. Even the disciples, as we were talking in John 9, 1 through 5, says, even the disciples were still wrestling with this while walking with Jesus. And they were like, this blind guy, mom or dad, who sinned? And he's like, nobody. It's so that God could be glorified. And then he heals him, which is pretty cool. Okay. Now, the main characters are oh, no, wait, that's the wrong story. But I couldn't find a picture I liked, so we went with VeggieTales. Anyone who has not watched that, has anybody seen it besides me? Okay. So, the bunny. Now, I hope that sticks in your head for the rest of the time. All right. So, you got Eliphaz, the Temanite. I almost was just going to say, what's his bucket, and what's its bucket from what's its place. But it's Bildad, the Shuhite, and Zophar, the Namathite. They weren't Rezels. They were just conventional guys. They weren't out there thinking differently than anybody else. As I said, it's what everybody knew. It was culture accepted. Theologically, it was mainstream. It was very Proverbs-style wisdom of the righteous prosper. It had a blessing curse language. If you want to go read and really look at where they might have, Deuteronomy 28, it was talking about this heavily of if you're good, you're good. If you're bad, you're going to get punished. And then just common ancient assumption about divine justice. So let's talk about that for a second. Is there divine justice from God Almighty?
Yeah.
Okay. Then why, without Jesus Christ, absolutely. People who reject Christ and never come to him have a divine judgment coming in the end. Do we today, though, for significant, not even significant, just sin in general, do we see a lot of punishment going on right now? I'm asking.
I think so culturally because the level of sin is so increased, but also the level of depression, the level of disease, the level of, I think there is justice, it's just not, there's a verse in the Bible where God gives them over to a reprobate mind.
Totally agree. Okay.
So I think the justice is maybe not, we don't see fire and brimstone.
Sure.
But they are reaping their rewards.
So I can agree with part of that from a health and everything else, we live longer than we ever have. We see it on the TV, but actually crime rates have come down, the murder rates, all those things, except in certain little pockets. But overall, we live in much healthier, the pastor's even spoken from the pulpit. I mean, the blessings we enjoy are so much greater. Now, I'm going to, especially for Christians who we deal with it, if we are followers of Christ, I don't know about y'all, but when I really blow it, I've yelled at Christy. I know y'all never imagined I would do that, but I have, and she'd agree if she were sitting here. My conscience will eat me alive. And when I make my conscience, the Spirit of God is just beating the living bejiminy out of me to make that right. And that's just a small thing. If at work, I'm thinking, okay, it's a Friday afternoon. I'm really tired. I don't want to deal with this. I'll just deal with it next week. But it's due that afternoon. I'm going to finish it because I will not rest that whole weekend. And some people are like, oh, well, that's just your conscience. It is, but I also think it's who I believe in, that it tells me to work for him and not for this world. And I think I struggle in that fashion. But those that are outside, I'm gonna come to those that don't believe in God. I absolutely believe that they get away with murder right now because God talks about he will have the final justice and they'll stand before him one day and answer for all of it. Because from an outwardly worldview, they look like they're doing pretty well. Now, I don't know what their inner turmoils are. I got to imagine some of them go behind those kinds of closed doors and they cry themselves to sleep because having $1 million or $100 million in the bank does not guarantee happiness. However, if anybody wants to give me $100 million, I will report back on how that goes. All right. Yeah, it was a combination agreement. All right, so their view made sense. They were defending what everyone knew. Job was suffering severely, therefore, and if we've got a just God, therefore Job screwed up somewhere and sinned mightily. I believe this felt logical and responsible to these guys to the point they have felt they were protecting God's reputation. Any argument against that or for that? Thoughts? Because that's really, as I read through all of this, I got a very strong sense of these guys were like, Job, we're your buddies, but you blew it. You just need to confess this so you can get past it. And the conversations we'll look at here in a minute kind of tell that story. But anybody else struggle with that they thought they were doing right? I mean, I know we're never like this, but
I kind of, and I'm interested to go back and read it again, but I kind of got the vibe of similar to me, where I believe my intentions are correct to maybe defend God in the first few passages that they have, and as it keeps going for 38 chapters, it starts to, in my opinion, morph into I'm right and you're wrong, Job. Like it seems to be less of like defending God and more of a we got to make you see my side.
And we're going to talk about cuts. Each of the three guys, and we're going to get into it in a second, they each kind of had a little bit different spin on how they talked to Job. And the flow of who talked when was pretty interesting. So I wrote it out. We'll see that here in a second. So before I go to our next slide and really talk about were they friends or not? From what you know, were these good friends? Were these idiots? What do you think? Because we're going to get into it. What's your thought just from what your memory brings up from all the times you've heard this preached, if you've read it? Friends or not? Good friends?
Good.
Mediocre friends. Good friends.
Yeah.
Okay?
Sitting next to your guy and
No, don't say that.
Oh, well.
I'm going to talk about that.
They had not been in that situation before with Job. He had everything. He was so blessed.
They thought he was the guy.
They had not ever, with him, felt like they had to confront him.
Sure.
Obviously, you did something wrong.
No, I agree. Somebody.
They showed up and spent time with him.
That's
A lot of time.
They spent a whole lot. So let's get into that. All right. So what did they do right? Can somebody read Job 2:11 through 13 for me? 2:11 through 13.
Amazing picture.
You like that? So it's funny. So, and I had that little on last week's, planning to reuse it here, but so I'm scouring the internet I need a fun picture of Job and his friends, and they were all Job's laying on the ground and they're standing over him. It was bad. They all looked like they were drawn by some guy 1,000 million years ago. And then I ran across this, and I'm like, that is absolutely the best because it does so many things to your brain. All right, somebody have Job 2:11 through 13. Please.
Now when Job's three friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, they came each one from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, and they made an appointment together to come to sympathize with him and comfort him.
Very good.
When they lifted up their eyes at a distance and did not recognize him, they raised their voices and wept. And each of them tore his robe, and they threw dust over their heads toward the sky. Then they sat down on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights, with no one speaking a word to him, for they saw that his pain was very great.
Okay. How many of you have, and I hope everybody, you don't have to raise your hand, but I'll take feedback, have a handful of men or women that if life goes off the cliff, you know they're going to show up? Most of the people, and I find in Christian circles, almost everybody, it is scary when I ask. So Joe Lyons, one of my best buddies, lives in the Carolinas. We worked together at EDS for years and years and years. Love him to death. I was in his wedding. He's been around my kids since they were little bitty. But he's not a believer. He believes that there is a God, but he has not come to a realization that he needs Christ. He knows I pray for him. We discuss it pretty much every time we're together. But he is one of those that if I called today, if he can't afford a plane ticket, he's driving his truck to Dallas, Texas now. It's not a later. And if he called and the world went pear-shaped on him, I'm on the next available flight, or I'm in my truck driving to the Carolinas. I have several men in this room that I would call without hesitation that would come to my aid. John Talkington, we've known each other for 30-something years. He was my best man at my wedding, still one of my very best friends. And then, of course, Alan Hurst, whom I named my son after, Alan Scott. It's for the two of us, that has been my best friend since 8th grade and would come at a run. I don't know how people in this modern age, well, I do. They're sad and lonely, and there's a lot of therapy dollars spent when they don't have friends to talk to. Because there are times I'm sure every one of you could have probably spent $1 or $2 with a therapist, but instead you talk to your friends. And Nate made the mistake of coming, which I love having you here. But he and Cliff on Friday mornings for 10 plus years, and it's mutual. There are times Nate will show up or Cliff and they're like, I need to talk. And they'll share something and it stays within the 3 men. And we wrestle through stuff and we'll look at our Bible and see where the answer is. And sometimes we don't have a good answer. We just pray and love each other. I don't know how how they survive in this modern age without that. And it's very prevalent that they don't have it. We take that so much, or at least I do, for granted, that I got dudes I can call anytime and talk about anything. And they'll pray with me and be there for me. They'll chastise me if I deserve it, but because they love me, not because they're getting a leg up on me. That's what Job's friends were. That is my stand. You may argue with me. It's okay to be wrong in here. I just am not. So they came together. The one thing, and I didn't put it in the slides because it had been 2 or 3 more slides, and I don't know if I'll get through all 10 of them anyway. But this was really interesting. So Eliphaz the Temanite, everything I could find was that Teman, so he's a Temanite, was a city also in Edom, which was somewhere near Uz, which is still not Uzbekistan. It was likely 100 to 300 miles from where he was, depending on exactly where they associated Uz, possibly near Edom is what everybody had said. So Bildad the Shuhite, that's associated loosely, and again, let me make sure we understand. There's nowhere in the Bible. This is Scott speculating based on a bunch of Christian authors and what they've looked at maps. And I wasn't going to challenge them and try to go recreate it, but I'm comfortable. There's actually no mileage, no travel time. It's just that they each came from their own place. But I like to put a little context around that because remember at this time, they didn't hop in their pickup truck and drive across their farm to the next farm or even to the next, if I had a friend in Dallas that's 40 miles from right now, or maybe my brother-in-law lives in Waxahachie. If he called and said, hey, I could use some help, that's an hour drive. Try doing that on horseback or camelback or walking. That takes a little bit of planning, some prep. I'm going to be away from work for a while. I mean, there's a lot to it. So they assume that Shuha was probably associated with an Arabian tribe somewhere to the east or southeast of Israel that could have been 200 or even up to 400 miles away. Zophar, the Namathite, Naaman's location is uncertain. Multiple ancient sites use that name. It could be all over the place. They assume it was also somewhere near Edom, maybe near Judah, 100 to 300 miles away. So let's just cut all that down to the minimum. Let's say they all traveled 100 miles. That took a little prep. Oh, and for the story to get there, they didn't have the internet. They didn't have cell phones. And we read last week where it talked about that he was months just in agony, and and I'd said I think the whole thing probably took a year, maybe even more. But we know one day everything got destroyed. Then he got sick for an extended period. And when you add in these guys travel, prep, just the word. So let's say somebody, that story started spreading once people knew about it, because this all happened. And other than his 4 servants who survived and his wife, nobody knew this was going on. I mean, people would start going, hey, Job's kid's house fell over in a tornado. I mean, by the time it spread, and all 3 of these guys who live separately, and this is why I think it was God ordained, they all heard about it separately, but came together to come travel and see him. Do I think they all arrived on the same day? I just don't, but it implies that they do. So even as improbable as that sounds, I think that it is very likely that they all got there very close to the same time, especially since it said they arrived, they saw from afar, tore their clothes, threw dirt all over themselves, and wailed loudly at how bad Job looked. So it had to be pretty awful.
It said they made an appointment together. So you wonder how
There you go. Unless one of them called the other, and they traveled to the other. Well, okay, I said that wrong. Yeah, or that's probably it. Yeah,
La Hacienda.
once a quarter. Yeah, we go over to La Hacienda, and we just hope they have a table enough in case extras show up. Yeah. Speaking of, I'm going to do another sidebar. I loved what you said to him last week. Perfect. So that, and I have to is it okay if I let everybody? I'm going to do it anyway. I don't know why I'm asking. So Chad and Thomas sent it to me. Chad sent Thomas a note afterwards going, it's kind of interesting. Scott filled the room up, and you usually have about 15 people here. What that is everyone goes to see the circus every once in a while, but you don't want to do it all the time. That's the way I took that. So,
Hey, Scott, do you
yeah.
think that God was a friend of Job's?
Yes, I think he's my friend. If you're a believer he didn't have the Holy Spirit, so, but I absolutely, based on what God said about him, how would I not see him as a friend? And I'm asking, I'm not challenging, I'm very curious where you're going with this.
Well, what I was thinking was, so God orchestrated all this.
He did, and knew it was going to happen. That's the crazy part.
1A, God brought it up. Satan had come to the throne room of God, but he hadn't brought any of this up. But God said, have you considered my servant Job? And now, all of a sudden, Satan considers Job.
Agreed. And in the same vein, though, so I'm going to extrapolate out, and y'all can argue with me because I'm used to being wrong occasionally. Christy would laugh if she were sitting here. So God loves us, but yet allows us to go through horrible things. It does, because of the world we live in. It's still fallen. It was fallen at that time. This was where he actively said, Satan, have your way with Job. And then said, okay, now you can touch his flesh. There was an outcome, though, on the other end, that he was going to bless Job so much more for showing that he stayed righteous and did not curse God and die, as his wife had asked. And as these guys are going to basically he's going to continue to claim his innocence, and that God is God. And that's at the end of the story, we all know, it really is. God is God and we aren't. So because suffering happens to us, yes, not on this scale, but I would ascertain that I have a friend who's, I guess she was 13, 14. I can't remember the gentleman's name. He joined our group for a couple of years, many years back, and his child was taken with cancer and died on him. And yet he was a believer in Christ and still worshiped God even though he was angry and bitter and struggling with it. I would still say God was his friend even though he allowed his child to be taken. Just like Job's, all of them were taken. And yes, he brought it up with Satan, but he had a plan that I still don't quite understand until I get to the end of the story. And then I'm like, okay, he doubly blessed him, and he's able to use it as a lesson for this room and everybody else who's ever studied it. That's where I have to go with it. What does the rest of the people think? I think God was definitely Job's friend. I know he's mine, even with what I... Yeah.
Also because the same losses that Job had, his wife had, and the same blessings that Job had in God, he ended up getting.
This is true.
My mom would argue that it's not a blessing to have 9 more children.
Okay, Christy laughed 10, actually, because he had 7 plus 3, and it says he returned them all. So Christy, we were talking about this, she said, okay, so they were all grown, so I'm going to put the mom, let's say they started really early, I'm going to put her at mid-50s to 60. And then we go through, she said, okay, let's say it's a year. So she's 61, 62. And Job goes, God's given us all our kids back. Get ready. And then so for the next 15 years, she has 10 more children. Christy was like, she had 20 kids. What? And that's when Christy's like, yeah, definitely God ordained. Definitely they were in those bodies that live a lot longer. Because I was thinking, okay, I'm 56. And if went through this and I'm 60 and God goes, by the way, you're going to have 10 more kids. All I'm thinking is 10 kids, that's 15 to 18 years of diapers and screen. Oh, no, thank you. Yeah, I mean, but it is highly interesting. And we're going to talk about her some at the end. I'm leaving her out specifically because there's a whole lot of back and forth around how she's seen. And she's in it such a small amount. I mean, just a couple of little blurbs and that's it. Which I find fascinating that the story really, it's about Job and his buddies. And then God, of course, showing up and having a little bit of a say. Yeah.
I think also when you think about God as being your friend, he's not like the genie in Aladdin.
No, absolutely not.
He's not even going to be a friend similar to like the kind of human friend that you have.
Sure.
In the sense that he's perfect and he has this eternal time scale that he deals with, as opposed to something that like we don't have that kind of scale. And so, like when he makes decisions that are absolutely correct, and he's not willing to negotiate on his holiness. And so he has different
Ever.
Yeah, and he has different viewpoints and different kind of standards than we do. And so when he relates to his children and the people that he considers his friends, he's going to have different. He's got to behave differently than we do, and it's because of we're not holy, and he is. Like I think it's our perspective that's skewed versus his.
And I've often thought about, as I've read through this multiple times, did he offer up Job because he's outside of time, so he can see, and it doesn't work in my head, but I'll accept it that he can see all of it. He sees time the same way that we can read a book, or you can go read the last, as my friend Thomas, he goes and reads the last chapter to see how the book's going to come out before he reads it, which is ridiculous. But God can do that all the time. He does. He knows our days are numbered. He knows every second of our lives down to that last one and knows when it's going to happen. And yet still blesses or moves us along this path because of what he wants to see accomplished. Even though he knows how it's going to go down.
I don't mean to like rabbit trail.
You're okay. I'll let you a little bit.
And I'm gonna quote someone who I know is kind of a really dangerous person to quote, but Ravi Zacharias had a really good argument about part of the reason that some of the evil happens in the world, and it's if God could have created, he could have chosen to not create. He could have chosen to create perfectly, like everything, put Adam and Eve in the garden, there wouldn't have been a tree, and they wouldn't have had the opportunity to sin. He could have prevented Satan from even showing up or falling. He could have prevented all of those things, and he didn't choose to do any of that. And part of that is that if you create a world where people don't have a choice, then you're creating a world where no one actually has any ability to fall in love. Like, people have to be able to choose in order for love to be genuine. And if you don't have that choice, then it's not real. And that's kind of like, so a lot of the horrors and things that we experience in this world are a direct, can be directly traced back to the fact that if love is going to exist, and authentic, genuine, true love is going to exist, then there has to be an opportunity for the antithesis of it to be as well. And so, like, I always kind of see that as a really powerful argument.
Sure.
And it's difficult to contend otherwise. I mean, like, we're either automatons or we have a choice.
It is, and we will not go down this rabbit trail because I need, like, I don't know, a lot of. I'd have to put Thomas up here or Scott, the other Scott that y'all thought was going to show up last week. You missed that, by the way. It was great. I had no. It's not that Scott. You have to deal with me. And then I said, yes, it is rude if you get up and leave. We could get into the whole thing of, are we chosen or did we make the choice to follow Christ?
The answer is yes.
To both. Yes, I know. Yeah, I had an older pastor said, you walk up to the pearly gates, and on it says, enter all you who choose freely to follow me. And on the back of it, it says, I chose you before the day you were conceived, before I put time in motion. You were mine and I chose you. And yes is the answer. Okay, so who has ever, all right, one more and then I got to move on. No, you're fine.
So you were talking about him knowing how it all, he knows everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tapestry. Somehow, it's not, I think as Americans, we thank God for him working things out for my good. And we forget that every single person he's orchestrating everybody's lives at once. So sometimes with my parents' health or chronic illness and all these different things, sometimes what she went through was so that years down the road, she could give a word of comfort to someone else. And it was
That's fair.
at the same
I guarantee Job could have done a master class on how to deal with suffering.
Maybe some of
Fair.
his friends needed this.
That's very possible. Yeah. That's really, I did not come down, my brain did not take me there. I actually kind of like that. That's pretty good stuff. All right, so the biggest thing I want you to get out about friends showing up, I said they traveled intentionally, they coordinated together to make an appointment, and they journeyed for days, weeks. This wasn't hours like us in a car to go across town. And their initial response shows deep respect and empathy. If something horrible happened to somebody here and we were all sitting in a hospital room or in the waiting room of a hospital while one of the loved ones out of here was going through some kind of emergency surgery and we didn't know if they were going to come out, I would be hard pressed, and I could do it, but just for the afternoon to sit there and just pray and be physical comfort like these guys did for 7 days. I couldn't, yeah, well, that's true too. I couldn't sit still for 7 hours. Ever. I couldn't do what these guys did. How many in the room would argue that they weren't true friends? Just for this piece. Forget they haven't said a word and they're going to stick their foot in their mouth in a minute. But any argument that these guys were like those kind of friends that we would call in an emergency? Fair? Okay. Now let's see why friends get it wrong sometimes. All right. So remember, they all felt that suffering equaled sin. I'm not going to read all of this, but if you want to go back and really kind of get, so Job starts this. Job speaks up through 1 through 26, and it's really a series of laments that he just starts laying out. I mean, he talks about it would have been better to have been born dead. I can't believe this is happening to me. He's struggling with why God's allowing it. I mean, it is just 26 verses of, oh my gosh, what has happened to me? And I strongly recommend you go read that because we're going to talk a lot more about it next week when we get into Job himself. But that's why I'm going to skip it over. But I want you to know where it is. So then there's some examples of his friends eating some shoe leather. In Job 4:8, Eliphaz says, as I have seen, those who plow iniquity, they reap the same. So here's this guy going, hey, you must have done something wrong. Then we go on and it says, Bildad says in Job 8:3, says, does God pervert justice? And this goes back to where I said, God is just. Therefore, your suffering, if you're getting it for not doing anything, then God can't be just. Therefore, this is illogical and cannot be true, because you can't suffer like this unless there's an unjust, and it's either you or God, and it's got to be you, because we all know God is perfect and sovereign. Therefore, what did you do, Job? This one, if I'm Job, and I don't care how sick I am, someone's getting hit in the mouth. Your children must have sinned against him, said Bildad, Job 8:4. Because remember, the thought was back then, yeah, they could pay, but that all of them went down. They're thinking, hey, maybe they were in on it too. Whatever it is that's going on, maybe that's why y'all are so prosperous. Y'all cheating people. What is it you're doing? Those are Scott's words, not in the Bible. And then Zophar just tacks on, and he says, know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. How's that one strike you? I think of all of these, the one with the kids just gets a punch in the mouth. But this guy's saying, hey, you're not even getting the half of what you deserve. And all I can think of is, besides dying, what else is there? Any thoughts on that? Because that one struck me as much as any of them of, what is this guy thinking? That he's basically saying, you're not even getting the full just desserts for whatever you did. And I don't even know what it is. Yeah, please.
Job prayed for his son's forgiveness for sins he didn't even know about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was the, for those who don't know what he's talking about, he was the priest of the family. He went and did sacrifices for his family for the sins that they may have committed at the time. Very good. All right, so I thought this was interesting. I'm just going to read this real quick. So the flow looks like this. Job speaks, then Eliphaz, and then Job responds to him. And then Job talks to God, basically, what the world are you doing to me? Then Bildad talks about him responding to God. Then Job responds to Bildad, and then he talks to God again. And then Zophar talks to Job about what he said about God, and then Job responds to him. Job talks to God. Then Job even asks, how have I sinned? He really starts getting into it. Then it's Eliphaz, then it's Job. Job starts defending himself right about there. Bildad talks, Job, and I think at this point he's starting to get tired because now he doesn't talk twice, he just talks once. And remember, his buddies aren't sick. He is unbelievably ill and covered and nothing feels good. I mean, this is bad stuff. And then Job talks about wicked, not punished. And then Bildad talks again. And then Job. Then there's a shift, and that's what we're going to go into. So, this is a really sick guy and his friends, and we had a few of the verses there of things that they've done. And this is a huge conversation, and I got to think this took place over at least the course of a day to a week. This is back and forth, because I got to think Job rested in here somewhere just because of his physical ailments. But I also think he was getting worn down when he quits doing double. He just starts going, okay, here's what I think, and then they stand up and go, how can I stay silent when you're, blah, blah, blah. This back and forth, 3 against 1, is just, it's a beating. And when you read it, as I stated the last time, I go to Job when I'm feeling like the world is throwing rocks at my head, and I usually don't have to get past chapter 2, and I'm like, you know what? I think I'm okay. God, thank you for your blessings. Help me to get through this. It's really not all that bad. But in this interaction, it is just kind of like the picture. What could possibly go wrong with the guy welding with the acetylene tanks right behind him? Yeah, please.
Scott, I think the problem becomes that they're arguing from effect to cause. There's no dispute about the effect, which is Job's suffering.
Right.
But the cause, they're handicapped by their personal view and by the cultural view that it has to be sin.
Absolutely.
And so Job is saying...
They can't see past it.
Exactly. And Job is saying that can't be it.
Right. I'm innocent.
We know, but I haven't sinned.
Well, but he even says I'm innocent. He talks about, look, I'm innocent before God. And even God had referred, Satan said, this is the most, he is the best I got.
And so the argument becomes, and subliminally is, if this is the effect, can there be a different cause?
Agreed? No, agreed. All right, so that's good. Please.
You know what? It might even be that when his friends see Job, they know that something's going to happen. Like, there's a point at
Maybe.
like you know,
They just went the wrong direction if that's what they're
there's
thinking.
something where like people sit back. You've heard. I mean, like people say, like, is there a higher power at work here? Like
Sure.
there's something. This is going so bad that something is going on,
Right.
And there, you know that they even saw Job from afar and were wailing because it was so bad.
Oh yeah, and they
Right?
didn't
All of
come
his
if they
kids
didn't
died.
care.
All of his flocks get taken. Like everything. Like it's it's comical how bad it is,
Yeah.
right? And so from their perspective, I mean, it's hard to argue with the logic from that, right? Like, especially when you're in that culture that thing. But I mean, we even do it, right? Like, is there a higher power at work when things go so wrong, right? And you're just like, wow, am I being attacked supernaturally? And that might be, you know what I'm saying? That might be.
I do, and I lean
conclusions are wrong.
I lean on the other side, and I would, whether you agree or not, but I see some of the people that prosper in this land and the wealth and the power and the things they have, and it's shown that they are evil, that they are not a righteous person, and yet they appear to prosper beyond belief. And if my Bible didn't say God's going to have the last word, it's just not my timing, it's His. I literally am glad that's in my brain, because otherwise I would fume more than I do at some of what I see as just blatant injustice, just ridiculous levels. But the Bible is so clear on it, and I mentioned it earlier. We are so in the times, and they've done it all through history. It's not just us, but bad is good and good is bad. And it drives me bananas because the Spirit of Christ lives in me. The Scott, a lot of y'all heard this too. If it weren't for Christ, I'd be dead or in prison. Period. The end. I know me too well. I'm absolutely depraved. I know where my life would have gone without Him. But because He lives in me, when I look at this, I am like, that's not fair. I want you to do something about it, God, because I'm not getting to do it because I follow You and I'm happy. Do something over there. And it doesn't seem to do it. Okay. So let's let the young guy talk. Here we get a chance to focus. Enter Elihu at Job 33. The things that he did. Oh, and could somebody grab 33, 6 through 17? I want someone to read that here in just a second. Job 33, 6 through 17. So the thing that you'll see here is he listened before speaking. My wife, when we discussed this, said you should listen to those words. I know none of you other guys are that way, but I have been known to jump straight into something before I hear it completely out and eat shoe leather, sometimes up to the knee.
Does it have something to do with the name Scott?
It could be. Are you saying that he's been known to occasionally, and that's why we get along so very well. So he listened. And the thing that we're going to hear, at least how I heard, and y'all can argue it, it's okay to be wrong, but he defends God's character, not his own conclusions. And he rebukes the other three older men when talking about Job as he does his whole thing. But this is the reframe of the conversation. Who got 33, 6 through 6? Yes, please.
Behold, I belong to God like you. I too have been formed out of the clay. Behold, no fear of me should terrify you, nor should my pressure weigh heavily on you. Surely you have spoken in my hearing, and I have heard the sound of your words. I am pure, without transgression. I am innocent, and there is no guilt in me. Behold, he invents pretexts against me. He counts me as his enemy. He puts my feet in the stocks. He watches all my paths. Behold, let me tell you, you are not right in this, for God is greater than man. Why do you complain against him that he does not give an account of all his doings? Indeed, God speaks once or twice, yet no one notices it. In a dream, a vision of the night, when sound sleep falls on men while they slumber in their beds, then he opens the ears of men and seals their instruction, that he may turn man aside from his conduct and keep man from his pride.
Very good. So did you hear, and we didn't read a whole ton because I knew I just wouldn't be able to get through it in an hour. I strongly recommend if you want to go back and understand how each of these three guys went after Job. But this young guy, he's like, first, he listened to all of that. You got to realize he has listened to, remember me reading Job, guy. He heard all of that before he opened his words and opened his mouth. And one of the first things he says is, hey, God is God and you're not. I mean, he talks to us through our dreams, or he shows up when he chooses. Sometimes we don't even listen to him. This is his choice. It's not It's not it's your fault, it's their fault. It's, you guys got to realize who we're dealing with here. And it's almost the first inkling of where we're going to go into when Job talks, because I'll do a little piece on his responses next week, but it'll mostly be him talking to God, and then the last week will be God responding, which will be a lot of fun. So, in the reframe there, his answer isn't complete either, though, because he isn't God, but he's trying, I think, to direct Job towards the I'm God and you're not, which I've used a number of times, because that's what I want you to get out of all this. We will see in week 4 when God speaks, he is the only one of the 4 who doesn't get personally rebuked by God for what he says. Which, because I know that, because I've read the whole thing, I put a lot more credence in what he's saying and how he's framing his words to Job over the other 3 guys. Because I think they're trying to get to you did something wrong, tell us what it is. I feel that he's saying, whoa, wait a minute. Remember, we're dealing with God. Yeah, heard all this stuff, guys, but this is God we're talking about, not our thoughts, not our experiences, not what history tells us, not what culture tells us. We're talking about God here. Any comments?
That's a good thing.
Okay, Thomas is wrestling with what he wants to say back there. That's why I was quiet.
Well, it's interesting to me that if this effect can only be caused by sin, what you've done is you put handcuffs on God. He can only respond.
Fantastic. And I've said it, I'll say it a lot over the next 2 weeks. God is God and we are not. And this time when I read through and studied through to stand up here and talk last week, this week, and the next couple, that has resounded in my head because I keep going back to how this started, that it was a scene in the throne room of God, and he unleashes him on one of his best. And we wrestle with that, but then we go to the end and he restores, and it was said, hey, maybe that's going to be used. There's so many, and just so that we could wrestle with this in this room of, just because I see suffering doesn't mean that someone did something wrong. Even though in today's culture we see that, I think Christians see the opposite, which is bad guys get away with murder way more than we would like. And if I was God, we'd have all been dead long ago because I wouldn't have used flood. I'd have used, I don't know, fire. Yeah, something horrible would have happened. Yeah, meteorite, bunch of them, moon crash. I don't know. So, Thomas,
Fire from heaven.
yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing that was always fascinating to me was how Elihu, however you pronounce his name. Elihu, thank you.
What's his bucket?
This guy.
Mr. Bucket.
He does summarize some things, I think, really well. He in this case, he responds by saying, Job, I heard this. And then he gives us summary statements of what Job says, right? But he starts off with what Job says is true. I am pure without transgression. I am clean and have no guilt. That is a true statement, right? At the same time, Elihu starts off his whole thing says, "Well, my words come from my upright heart." That has been the issue.
Oh, absolutely.
To sit there and say this self-judgment. He goes on a little later on and sits there and says, "What man is like Job?" And then his response is, "He drinks derision like water. He keeps company with evildoers. He walks with wicked men." None of that is true. And so the problem I have with this guy being held up as he is the better version of the friends is he is still operating from the wrong perspective.
Okay.
Job is operating from an incorrect perspective.
Oh, because none of them...
They can't make sense of it.
Right, because they all... So I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't put it in my notes, but I've wrestled with it a few times, which was, well, how do you think Job saw people who suffered? I mean, seriously, prior to this happening to him, when he knew he hadn't done anything, when somebody's cows died, did he, just like his buddies, I'm going to say yes, go, I wonder what they did? I mean, and I could be wrong, but I don't think I probably am. Yeah.
That's the thing. I think that's what they're wrestling with is because, again, the one person who never shows up in the story again is Satan.
No, once he's had his 2 bits.
He's done.
Yeah.
And And so from their perspective, they're wrestling with this and they can't come up with an answer. And Eliyahu, of course, does what? In a more sympathetic way, he still lays the blame on who? It's Job. You're still wrong.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But it is interesting that when we're going to talk about it in week 4, God doesn't chastise him at all, which tells me, why would he do that? Yeah, I know. I got to stop. I did that on purpose because I forgot to watch. That's why I keep checking my phone. Isn't that I'm getting bored talking? The problem is I could talk, I don't know, pretty much all day. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up. Job's friends shine a light. That good theology without love is cruel. These are some of the things I pulled out of. You can have the best theology in this world, but when you throw it at somebody and it is not with the love that they really need at the time, I think it's cruel. Certainty without humility. I believe you're condemning somebody when you have no right to do it. And then you can't fix someone else's pain. I don't care what you say. Romans 12:15 says, weep with those who weep. And for me, that says when you show up, don't be looking for why something happened. Just be in the moment with the person. And y'all have all heard this, and I know we've all done it. Because fortunately, I like to say I've never shown up and gone, yeah, what'd you do wrong? Because your kid's in the hospital. I mean, we'd all go, oh. But this world still seems to think there's some give and take. And it's usually with monetary things and personal things.
And
Like
before that, it also says, rejoice with those who rejoice.
Yes.
Weep with those who weep.
Yes, but I just wanted this part. No. I'm taking it semi in context. The one thing though, and I don't think I want any answers. When all those wildfires and everything were going on in California, did it go through anybody's mind of, well, those heathens deserve a little bit of that? Because this was, I mean, some of these houses were, and it went through like multi-million-dollar houses. And was there maybe an inkling that went through Scott's brain and going, they're millionaires. It's not, they probably deserve this. So don't think we don't have things that say, yeah, I'm wrapping it up, buddy. Takeaways. How do we speak truth without losing compassion? And of the mistakes these friends made, which ones do you see today in your own lives? That would be where I would ask. And next week, Job will sound off. Yeah, please. Of course you can.
I'm doing the Bible recap, which is a read through the Bible in 1 year, and then going to a class. And so Jana Broderick was teaching Job this last week. And she had us do something that I've never done through Job before, but had us take each of the friends and look for what they said that was true about God. And we had this huge chart, and I think everybody in the class was shocked that the friends had some truth to say.
Oh, absolutely.
We had long lists. It was really a fun way to do Job.
And I will say, because when Steve and I talked about this, and Thomas also, I had said I can do it in 4 weeks. As I studied through this part, I kept going, I should have done a week on each dude and really looked at what they said, because there's just no time to do it. So
George
this is much more of an
asks
overview.
questions when he wants to stretch it, so you could just stretch it.
All right. I appreciate your time. Next week, we will talk about Job. And I think it's a really interesting take on how I'm going to do it. So very cool that. And then we will have God show up in our 4th week to tell us what he thought of all this. All right. Thank you so much.